Welcome to a Paladin's review, Age of Wonders 3. The Golden Realms are a triumph of the Eternal Lords. Written and voiced by KingIsaacLinksr. Game developed and published by Triumph Studios. Please note that base game was gifted by friends, while the expansions and special edition was purchased by myself. Preamble. Age of Wonders was initially developed and released back in 1999 by Triumph Studios, a studio based in the Netherlands. The studio is primarily known for its work on the Age of Wonders series, as well as the Overlord games published through Codemasters. After the success of Age of Wonders 2, The Wizard's Throne, was launched in 2002 with improved mechanics, graphics, and a continued storyline. It was met with success as well, so work began on an expansion shortly after. Age of Wonders Shadow Magic is the third game in the series, released on July 25th, 2003, a little more than a year later. It was probably planned as the expansion to Age of Wonders 2, but it seems that they decided to make it its own game instead. And it served as the highlight of the Age of Wonders series for a long time to come. Such a long time that it would be 11 years before Triumph Studios returned to its series, crafted and released Age of Wonders 3 in early 2014 to critical acclaim. This is a polished 3D entry with refined mechanics, random generation, and promises to be a complete package. It would be followed up with 2 expansions, Golden Realms, which was released in September 2014, and Eternal Lords, released in April 2015. Both expansions were designed to add significant content, abilities, new mechanics, and races or classes to the base game. The game is still in development, but no future expansions are currently planned, as of this review. Furthermore, development has slowed significantly since Eternal Lords and a modding patch that was added late last year. The game doesn't necessarily need development, but it's something to keep in mind if you're buying into this game. Oh, and side note, the patch notes per patch are insanely long, almost novel length. The Triumph devs clearly do a ton of work every patch, and it's an impressive reading if you ever get around to reading it. Personally, I've only played Age of Wonders Shadow Magic before Age of Wonders 3 came onto the scene. I do own copies of the other 2 entries, but I just haven't devoted time to tackling them just yet. I enjoyed the hell out of Shadow Magic personally. I thought it was the craziest mix of mechanics that still somehow made sense when all combined together. When I heard that Age of Wonders 3 would be coming back in 2014 on a modern engine with a lot of new updates, I was really looking forward to getting my hands on it. And boy, I didn't regret the wait either. Still, let's take a look at Age of Wonders 3 and its expansions. Initial overall thoughts. 2 years have passed since I was gifted the base game of AOW and purchased the expansions along the way. I've put in over 100 hours of play in the single-player campaigns, online and play-by-email multiplayer modes. I'd say I spent most of my time in online multiplayer, but there was quite a bit of time spent play-by-email too. From the get-go, I was already enjoying this entry, and I think it's the simple reason that there aren't a lot of 4X strategy titles like this on the market. The blending of RPG, 4X, and empire building mechanics is still rare despite the resurgence of turn-based games in recent years, and Age of Wonders seems keen on proving that it still has its place. This is the kind of strategy game I like to sink an entire Sunday afternoon and evening into, where time simply goes by and I get sucked into managing my noble empire of good humans against the undead scourge of the evil necromancer, aka Madagarma. That one more turn addiction is ever present here, and I've burned many a happy days trying to explore, determine the next resource to take over, training armies, and expanding the empire as best I could. With the random procedural generation, each game and its map will feel unique, even when playing on the same map settings as before. Just the experience of role-playing a fantasy character that's in charge of any number of types of empires was engaging on its own. But I am a bit of a role player, so maybe that changes my perspective. There's all sorts of roles you can choose from: evil, neutral, chaotic, elemental, destructive, good, or peace-seeking. The game allows you to build your own experience and try to play to the conditions you set for yourself. I'll explain more as we go along. AOW 3 is about victory through expansion, fighting, and conquest. As the leader of a powerful empire, you should always be exploring to find hidden treasures and places to set up new cities. To expand your empire as quickly as possible by taking over resource buildings and conquering your foes. You should be moving quickly or else you'll get left behind. The basic structure of your empire are towns, cities, and outposts. These places let you build units, upgrades, and more that grant access to more powerful units, increased revenue streams, and giving a sense of permanence to your empire, which you'll need for the army and taking over rival throne cities. Even with the alternate victory conditions brought about in the expansions, military prowess is what the game clearly favors for victory. The diplomacy system is simply too simplistic. It gives the very basic functions of diplomacy: declaring war, allowing armies through territories, and etc. And that's about it. It also provides a way to talk to players if needed. Otherwise, the AI doesn't use it very well, and trying to barter with it is near impossible. Side note, you could technically win a victory through peaceful means, but that would require forging alliances with other players who would win the game for you. It's not that enjoyable, nor encouraged by the game or myself. Plus, those same allies could just betray you and take you over. So, as you open up Age of Wonders 3, a lone bell chimes to mark your entrance, and the music builds to a muted, soaring orchestra score. The menu presentation features whatever hero your single-player campaign is currently on, while presenting your play options. The menus are designed competently, allowing you to get into games quickly and easily without any fuss, which is good because there's a ton of content both built in and available through mods for you to experience. In the game, besides the multiplayer components, there are 4 official campaigns, with all the expansions installed, providing the player with access to storylines that depict a global conflict in the game. For those that want more, or something non-official, modding support was greatly expanded at the end of 2015, and the modding community has been growing ever since. I haven't touched any of the mods myself, but perhaps I will one day. As for multiplayer, the devs did give players several options: hot seat local multiplayer, online, and play by email. Multiplayer experience. Play by email and hot seat can only be played in the traditional turn-by-turn style, but online multiplayer allows for simultaneous turns, where players can take out their turns at the same time and are able to see what their opponent is doing during said turn. The upside to this style of game is that players aren't just waiting for their turn half the time. The downside is that each action will have latency, and moving units will have longer latency delays as well. This will be especially noticeable the farther people are from each other. I played with people from Sweden, and while the lag is noticeable, It wasn't a huge problem unless one of our connections was really poor. It's a turn-based strategy game, so it's not like you need to perform actions instantaneously anyway, but you should have at least a decent connection. When manual fights are started, all players are brought in to watch the events unfold. This is both cool and potentially annoying to watch these fights break out, especially if it's happening a lot. As such, you'll want to have manual fights sparingly, or turn them off if you want to keep the game moving quickly. Oh, and the game will tell you if you've set up your network properly with an open port that allows a strong connection to other players. It is possible to play AOW with other players on a network that hasn't been properly set up, but you'll experience worse latency as a result and may not be able to create and run the game yourself on your end. So, generally it's best for all players to open a port in the router for AOW to work the best. An average game is going to take a very long time to complete. I'd wager about 8 to 12 hours for a medium map on default settings, so it could take a few weekends to get through a single online game, and half a year in quote-unquote real time to play a single game in the play-by-email system. This will especially be true if there are any players taking an unusual amount of time to complete their turn. Play-by-email is especially suspect to this delay. I of course can't say for certain because there are a lot of factors that can change how long a game will take. Some games you'll just have players really fracking it up at the beginning of the game, to the RNG system deciding to drop high-level tier bone dragons and marauding spider queens right on you. Or potentially worse, you have a giant stalemate at the end game that goes on forever. You just can't say for certain with Age of Wonders or 4X games like these. The RNG system isn't designed to be evil on purpose. At least that's what the developers claim. But some games I've wondered. There's always a reasonable chance of being the winner, even if you don't have the best of starts. AOW's play-by-email system is very good, allowing the player to join a maximum of 5 games at the same time. Downloading, joining, and uploading games is both simple and fast. The only problems I ever ran into was when players decide to update to beta patches. Every player does need to be on the same version when playing. Play-by-email will allow for patch updates, but it's generally best for everyone to be on the same version when their turn comes about. As such, I would avoid using any beta updates unless everyone's agreed to using them. In my experience over the past couple of years, I've only finished 2 games out of 15 in the play-by-email format. Most of the time, people dropped out early or quit taking their turns until eventually there was no one left. It probably doesn't help that PBEM takes such a long time to complete, but it's worth mentioning here that my success rate for successfully completing games was rather low. When I last played, the games out there that weren't locked behind passwords, there's a decent if small amount. I don't know if it's gotten any better. However, there are forum communities out there that you will be able to set up games with and have a blast, so consider checking them out. Leader, Heroes, and Units Examination. Each player controls an empire led by a leader, a powerful character with vast control over their elemental and racial magic. These leaders can function in the role of a supporting hero or go on the offensive in the front lines with spells and other capabilities. They can also ride mounts, equip weapons, items, and armors, as well as level up during the game. Additionally, they are able to cast spells that can affect cities or other units, as well as learning new spells through knowledge research. There are plenty of spells to learn from, not only based on their class, but their specialization and racial attributes. They are your most powerful units you can bring to bear, but they are also a potentially crippling weak point of your empire. If taken out, they can no longer cast their spells. Researches stop dead, and whatever existing spells are cancelled. Leaders will return in a couple of days at their home throne, but that leaves the Empire vulnerable to attack and can slow everything they are producing down to a crawl. Generally, it's not a good idea to lose them. You can completely customize their appearance, race, class, and specialties, or pick from several defaults included in the game. The leader builder in this game is definitely good, if not the most powerful I've ever seen. I've created several unique heroes, and always liked coming up with new ideas for new ones. There are 7 types of hero units: dreadnoughts, theocrats, rogues, archdruids, sorcerers, warlords, and necromancers. They're all pretty self-explanatory, but I'll briefly go over them. Dreadnoughts use advanced technology, cannons, muskets, and warships to advance themselves in combat. Theocrats use their divine powers to buff units, balance the scales in their favor, and cleanse the land of evil, leaning on more powerful holy units. Rogues, on the other hand, use stealthy units and powers to hide your actions from other players until it's too late. Then there's archdruids that use the powers of nature, animals, and old gods. Sorcerers are the mages that use arcane powers to devastate and power themselves up with quite a few arcane attacks. And the swords, boards, and horses, the warlords have you covered there with powers related to making their war units that much more powerful. Finally, necromancers use the dark powers to bring up the undead, and in their wish to unite the world through being undead. It's rather disturbing, actually. These 7 classes are distinctly unique, despite having to play by similar rules to each other, and have different ways of attacking and defending in their own unique units and spells. This customization possibility is further expanded with the 9 races that the player can choose from: humans, high elves, dwarves, draconians, orcs, goblins, halflings, frostlings, and tigrans. So, you can definitely customize your own leader. Every empire has a structure to its army, and W3 is no different. Besides your powerful leader units, hero units will show up occasionally to enhance your army. They basically function like the leader, except that losing them isn't as devastating. These heroes don't necessarily have to be of your race or class either. And there's a myriad of units that you can build, ranging from the lowly soldiers to priests and knights all the way to siege weapons and powerful endgame units. These units are governed by their own stats, but the more important stats to consider are experience, what tier they are, and their morale. Units range in tiers 1 to 4, with each tier becoming more powerful at the expense of more resources and longer build times. Experienced troops gain extra benefits, with some evolving into stronger units, while others just become hardier and more proficient at their jobs. XP is gained through fighting. Morale, on the other hand, affects how likely they are to critically hit, fumble an attack, or desert your army. So, even a lowly army of Tier 1 units can win out against an unhappy T3 army, if they happen to be so lucky. Each class, race, and specialization has a chance of winning in Age of Wonders 3. They just have different methods to reach their victory, and it'll be up to the player to use those capabilities to their advantage. I don't think I've played enough of this game to make this assertion, but I don't feel there's one particularly overpowered hero class. but it's probable that I may get some disagreement about that. At the very least, in the 100 hours or so of playing the game, I never felt at a particular disadvantage playing as a certain race or class. I do have to say that I wish leader spells that affected the Empire were a little bit more diverse and interesting. The majority of those spells tend to be buffs or debuffs for enemies, and they feel fairly generic. I wish they had a little bit more capability to change the world, or just, I don't know, feel more powerful than they were. Right now, it just all feels surface level. I get that this would make balance far more complicated and possibly less fun if certain abilities were overpowered, but I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there that I don't think spells on the strategic map are all that interesting. Managing your empire and fighting the good fight. Keeping track of your empire and its units is essential to maintaining a productive and successful empire. Cities and units have a morale meter to gauge how happy they are. Morale can be affected by the land they are in, how successful the nation has been, and whether they get along with other units. Along with that is the race relationship system. Depending on how well you treat races within your empire will determine whether you get significant bonuses. So it's important to keep people happy, or rule with an iron fist, if you want to win. Failure to do so will lead to widespread unhappiness, which has several effects including, but not limited to, units potentially abandoning your cause and becoming rogue, cities spawning rebels, or those same cities asking other empires to liberate them, and combat/productive effectiveness severely reduced. Keep them happy is the moral of that story. Fighting can be handled through either the auto battle or manual fight system. Auto battle lets you instantaneously decide the fight, and it will give you a reasonable idea of whether the game thinks you're going to win. Sort of. However, auto battle isn't 100% reliable. I've had battles that should have been straight out victories, only to have all my units slaughtered by a couple of gnomes. It also won't estimate approximately how many units may die during the battle, and I've often found casualties are much higher with the auto fight system over manual fights. Sometimes the likeliness of winning can also be wrong, and fights that it considers a lost cause are actually quite winnable if you take control. Outside of just doing manual battles, your only option to guarantee victory is to roll the dice, or bring 2 to 3 times the firepower required. I sometimes wonder if it was intentionally designed to kill/severely injure units as a consequence of skipping the battle. However, if that is the case, I wish the game would at least show you what units could potentially end up dying as a result of that choice. As it is, it just makes the system feel like it randomly decided to punish you for no visible reason. I definitely wish the system was far more transparent about itself. As for manual battles, these are large hexagonal grids that take place on whatever terrain was depicted by the tile the army was standing on. And there are a surprising lot of 3D environments that were created. It surprised even myself. Recently, I had a battle on a bridge tile, and the battle actually took place on a giant bridge. Well, giant in quotation marks. I'd never seen that in the 93 hours of the game I'd played. I thought it was really cool. If you have battles underground, they will take place underground. Most battles will just have a few destructible objects or places of cover, but it will depend mostly on the terrain or place that you're fighting at. So, that's what changes it up. Battles are designed around the idea of flanking, cover, range, and movement actions. Your units should always be in the best position to flank enemies, have enough actions points to do damage, or to retaliate and avoid units that are their counters, such as while horsemen can theoretically defeat pikemen if they flank them, they may take a ton of damage for when that unit retaliates. So, you should assess strengths and weaknesses and position your units in the best place possible, constantly moving them around and going for the kill when it's convenient. Even an ugly fight can easily swing your way if you're lucky or careful. For more advanced plays, you should also consider what the next move the units surrounding your armies might make and plan appropriately. Simply charging in and hoping for the best is not always the best idea, and you could end up fighting a battle of attrition that will cost you in the long run. During manual fights, heroes and leaders can cast spells, and leaders can also cast combat spells even if they aren't present at the battle. It'll just cost twice as much mana. Spells are limited by not only the amount of mana, but how many casting points the leaders or heroes have, so careful application of spells are highly recommended. I really like the manual battle system in AOW3. It's quite robust, giving you the chance of all sorts of interesting battle situations, and also allowing for clever plays to get you out of some really bad fights, provided that you aren't screwed beyond all belief, that is. Sieges are quite a sight as a giant army comes down with lots of units and siege equipment against a beleaguered force of defenders. And those stories can be even made more epic by those defenders actually holding. Or just seeing a line of trolls absolutely wreck face on a poor army is just pure joy after spending so long building them. However, I do find the early game of manual battles to be a drag. For the most part, these battles generally one-sided, and the only reason they are played is because auto battles aren't reliable and every unit counts in the early game. Once you start hitting the mid to late game, things get more interesting and tactical. By then, you'll have more spells to choose from, units to fight with, and ways to move around. Though late game battles can also drag a bit between large armies, as units will take time to move, and you generally have a lot of units to move. I will grant that all of this is really tricky to balance in a 4X game like this, and maybe some of these complaints aren't valid. But it is something to consider, because some of these battles can feel very long and sometimes repetitive. Despite that, it works pretty well. I just wish the game was a little bit more open to casting spells early on. Single player campaign. While AOW has 5 unique campaigns, in my opinion they are the weakest aspect of this game. The first one, a supposedly easy campaign, is anything but. You play as the High Elves and are working to fight off the evils of the human Commonwealth while raising the Draconians to greatness once again. The human Commonwealth have their own separate campaign where you play as a captain in charge of fighting off the Frostlings in the north that are threatening to throw the entire region into chaos. My main problem with these campaigns is that the second mission in both shove you right into the deep end of the pool and expect you to swim with weights equipped. In both starting campaigns, the first, second, and third levels are heavily scripted, and that's as far as I got. And it's very noticeable. The player starts out by liberating and setting up new cities, and armies are built to fight with. The game is oddly and unusually generous by allowing the player to create as many units as they want before striking the first blow and starting the war, as it were. This is probably due to the fact that the first series city you're going to run into has 8 individual groups of tier 3 enemies and other powerful units guarding it. This wouldn't be an issue if the game didn't restrict your own forces to mostly Tier 2 units with one Tier 3 support unit. So the game puts you at a disadvantage right out the gate, forcing a long slug-out attrition war. Sure, you might think that you could try flanking these cities and starving them out, but the game has that already covered with more units, and if you aggro them, then your problems go from bad to worse. The AI is sadly predictable and will leave most of its units in these cities, while only a few roaming band of Tier 3 units will be let off the leash and try to roam behind your back lines. Oh, and side note, avoid aggroing the attention of any other factions in the game, or you may go from a bad to worse situation in a hurry. I spent an unhealthy amount of hours in retries to beat the second Elven mission, which I described above. After the long, slugging war of attrition, felt like I had completed an entire game, only to start the next mission and realize it was basically the same, with the same restriction of units. Except this time, you are playing as the goblins. Yay? The story is so poorly paced that by the time something story-related happens, you kind of forgot what happened by the time you even get there. I was hoping this was the only time it happened in the first and second story missions, but it just seems to get harder and harder as this third mission played itself out. It makes for a thoroughly unpleasant and difficult for difficult's sake experience. What about the other campaigns? Well, as far as I can make out of the Human Commonwealth campaign, it plays about the same. Hard and just unpleasant. I never got around to the expansion stories, but the game itself says they're more difficult, and I can only assume that it's more difficult. Maybe they're better developed, I don't know. After being exposed to the drudginess of the first two campaigns, I can't say I'm all that excited to pick these up. Having campaigns that are a long attrition slog just aren't fun. Not in the first few missions, anyway. I mean, I don't mind difficult missions towards the end. That's the whole point of having difficult missions. So long as you grant the player the tools to deal with them. But this game handicaps you and then throws you into that deep end and says, "Swim, sucker!" That's ridiculous. The end result is that it's a constant repetition of building as many units as possible, hoping the enemy doesn't flank your back line, push into the city and hopefully take it over, rebuild again. It's not necessarily the fault of the AI, though the questionable AI doesn't help. It's just that these are poorly designed campaigns from what experience I've had in them. I feel like more attention anyway, should have been kept here and made these a lot better than they were. Taking a look at Golden Realms expansion. Golden Realms takes where AOW 3 started and expands the content in multiple directions with a few new mechanics. A new race of halflings are reintroduced to the series with their own unique units and their main stat called Luck, which allows them to dodge attacks while in good spirits. There's new map locations to capture, new units to use and or fear, and many new items for your heroes to discover. These are just a few of the expansion's features. The halflings aren't my favorite race to use, and I never really got around to trying them out, but fighting against them can be tricky due to their luck mechanic. My favorite feature of this expansion are the Empire quests. These optional quests grant you rewards if you build your empire in a certain way first before any other rival empires. It's a nice little way to create rivalry between empires and rewarding these playstyles. There's also a new victory condition that I've never tried for called Seals of Power. Apparently it's where players must capture and hold structures for a certain amount of time before they can win. Of course, other players and beings won't take kindly to that, so it's not just a simple walk in the park. It's a neat idea, just never got around to tackling it. Golden Realms is perhaps less distinct or expansive than Eternal Lords is, but the upgrade it does have is still well worth obtaining. Halflings, new units, items, and so forth. It's worth getting. I can't think of any reason not to get this expansion, outside of my complaints about the base game, especially if you're willing to buy Eternal Lords, so definitely consider getting it. Taking a look at the Eternal Lords expansion. Eternal Lords is the bigger of the two expansions. It comes with a whole new leader class, the Necromancer, as previously talked about, the class that's devoted to creating and maintaining an Empire of the Dead. Two new races can also be used by the player, the Frostlings and the Tigrans. The Frostlings are about using warships and frost magic, while the Tigrans are fast and capable of changing their shape along with cultivating their necromantic prowess. There are a significant amount of features that were added to the game in this expansion, even in the free update. This happens to be when play by email was added to Age of Wonders, and a lot of balance changes were made as well during this expansion. More significantly, at least to me, was the expansion of the good, neutral, and evil specialization system, as well as cosmic happenings and the race governance mechanic. Now, when you play the game and stick to being good, evil, or even neutral, you'll get some good rewards for doing so. Cosmic happenings are essentially events that can randomly happen and affect your units or empire in ways that may benefit or harm you, maybe even spawn enemies. Race governance is how relations between races are handled. As you improve the race under your guidance, you'll get benefits, but if you mistreat the race or other enemy races that correspond with yours, your race won't respond that well. This also builds into the second alternate victory condition, Unifier. If you max out your governance of a race or races under your empire, you'll be able to build special buildings that, once you meet the requirements, allows you to win the game. I haven't tried for this victory condition either. Eternal Lords is quite the expansion and brought some of my favorite features to the game. I still say that Golden Realms is worth getting even after Eternal Lords was released, and I stick to that. Triumph Studios did a really great job on both expansions that added a lot of content, features, and new mechanics that expand the game out beyond what it was initially introduced. They also don't add too much additional complexity that would make the game too difficult to learn for new players. It's all very nicely done, and I have to give them kudos for the work done. I would recommend picking up the expansions if you're going to get the game. It's simply worth your while, and they offer good value for content. PC settings and audio-video. I'm not going to go into every single setting that you can select in this game. I would recommend checking my website or even going to PC Gaming Wiki. There's nothing really that stands out to me that's worth mentioning, so I'll just go into my overall thoughts. Age of Wonders 3 is incredibly performance demanding for a turn-based strategy title of its kind. I found that achieving 60 FPS was difficult for myself, and even for others that I know with higher-end machines in mind. It's certainly gotten better since the game was initially launched, but big battles and lots of effects running around will be demanding on any machine. At least the visuals look impressive to make up for the heavy drain, and there are certain graphical settings like fog and particle effects that you can turn down to get a better frame rate, but otherwise you're going to have to just deal with what you can get out of it. That being said, while it is a frame rate hog, the game has largely been stable for me since the last expansion came out. Before then, I only experienced a few odd bugs here and there. If I remember correctly, I think I only crashed once. Other notes, the soundtrack to this game is absolutely fantastic. A sweeping orchestral fantasy-based soundtrack that will really suck you into what's going on. The soundtrack can be expanded with 10 additional tracks from the expansions as well. So, yeah, really good job here. Sound effects and animations are also on point and do a good job of communicating what's going on in the world and individual battles from a distance. The quality of this game is very good. I don't really have any major complaints other than the frame rate's a little bit questionable. Final thoughts. Age of Wonders 3 combines empire building, role-playing mechanics, and turn-based strategy into one glorious mix. I don't regret the 100 hours I've sunken into this game and would not mind spending more. It's got great multiplayer support and a pretty decent community to go along with it. The sheer amount of content is also incredible as well. I haven't even touched on everything I could have in this review. There is a lot to find out. Each play generally will have the same flow from the early to late game, but it does it so well that it's hard for me to complain about it. I'm going to keep playing Age of Wonders 3 in the future, though I do have some reservations with said pacing of this game. I would say, though, that it does far more right than it does wrong. It's been a hell of a memorable experience. I just wish the early game's battles were more interesting and less one-sided. I additionally wish magic was a little less restrictive and more interesting. The game only really seems to get interesting once you hit mid to late game levels, but maybe that's just me. That being said, the RNG system is robust and fair along with the game balance, which seems to give all characters an even chance to win. At least, that's what it appears to do. There's plenty of races and specialties to pick from, so it's hard to say with any sort of absolute certainty. If nothing else, it was definitely hard to be bored by this experience. Far and away, Age of Wonders 3 is one of my top strategy games of all time. It's memorable for all the right reasons, despite its flaws and shortcomings. Is it a perfect strategy game? No, but I think it does the right things. I heartily recommend it for both new and upcoming 4X strategy game players or even more experienced one. This is a classic as far as I'm concerned and well worth your attention. Thank you for listening to this review of A Paladin's Review, Age of Wonders 3. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any thoughts or comments, please share them. I'd like to hear whether you enjoyed this reading of my review or not. And until next time, keep on playing games. I've been KingIsaacLinksr from A Paladin Without a Crusade. Ta-ta!